The woman in the ditch. It happened in October of 2019, just outside Rapid City, South Dakota, along a long rural stretch of Highway 44 where the fields run empty for miles and the only light at night comes from the moon and whatever your truck can throw onto the asphalt. I was hauling a refrigerated trailer of medical supplies from Minneapolis to Billings. It was close to 2:40 a.m., the coldest, loneliest hour of the night, and the fog had rolled in so suddenly that I had to drop my speed to 35 just to keep the road in view. I was dead tired, but I didn't want to stop on a completely empty highway. I'd done this route dozens of times, but that morning the silence felt heavier than normal, like the dark was pressing against the glass of my cab. About 20 minutes east of Farmingdale, I saw her. A woman stood in the ditch on the right side of the road, waving both arms above her head. Her clothes were soaked, and her hair hung in long black strands that stuck to her face. At first I thought she'd been in some kind of accident. She looked terrified, cold, desperate. I slowed down, flicked my hazards on, and pulled the truck toward the shoulder. I leaned forward to get a better look at her through the passenger window. But she wasn't there. The ditch was empty. Grass, mud, no sign of anyone. I kept scanning with my headlights, thinking the fog distorted her shape or maybe she fell backward, but there was nothing. My pulse hammered through my neck. I rolled my window down a few inches and called out, "Ma'am? Hello? Are you hurt?" No answer. Just the wind pushing fog across the field. I sat there for a moment, angry at myself for stopping. Maybe it was just exhaustion. Maybe a shadow in the fog tricked me. I put the truck back in gear and rolled forward. I didn't make it 20 yards. She was back. This time she stood on the left side of the road, closer than before, almost at the edge of the pavement. She looked straight at me. My headlights caught her face clearly, pale skin, wide eyes, mouth slightly open like she was about to speak. Her right hand lifted just a little, not waving now, but reaching. I slammed my brakes so hard the trailer lurched behind me. When I blinked, just one quick blink, she disappeared again. I felt the air in the cab drop several degrees, like someone had opened the freezer door. My radio crackled with static, even though I had turned it off earlier. Every instinct I had screamed to keep moving, but I couldn't stop thinking, what if she was real? What if she needed help? What if she collapsed in the dark? Before I could decide what to do, something whispered from the back of my cab. "Don't stop." I froze. The sound was soft, close, and unmistakably female. My entire body went rigid. I spun around in the seat, heart pounding so loud it drowned out my breath. The sleeper was empty. Nothing but my duffel bag and a half-zipped jacket. I stared at the shadows for several seconds, waiting for movement, waiting for another voice, waiting for anything. Nothing. But the cold was still there, thick, unnatural, as if it had settled over my shoulders like wet snow. I forced myself to face the road again. My hands shook on the wheel. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew with absolute certainty I needed to leave. I pressed the accelerator, and the truck crawled forward. The fog swallowed the spot where the woman had stood. For the next mile I kept checking my mirrors every 2 or 3 seconds. The fog thinned eventually, but the cold inside the cab didn't let up. It stayed with me like a presence. 10 minutes later I passed a small rest area. I debated stopping, but something inside me recoiled at the idea. I didn't want to be alone in a dark lot. I kept driving until I reached the outskirts of Rapid City and finally stopped at a well-lit truck plaza. I parked under the brightest light I could find. My hands still trembled as I cut the engine. I stepped out just to breathe air that wasn't freezing. The cold lifted almost instantly, as if whatever had been beside me vanished the second I touched concrete. Inside the plaza's diner I ordered coffee and tried to steady myself. A few other drivers were there, chatting, eating, laughing. I felt like I'd come from another world entirely. After a few minutes, the TV mounted above the counter switched from ads to local news. I didn't pay much attention until the anchor mentioned a location I recognized. Highway 44. East of Farmingdale. The headline read, "Body of Missing Woman Found in Ditch." My chest tightened. I turned to look fully at the screen. The anchor continued explaining that search teams located the body of a woman who had gone missing the previous evening. According to the sheriff, she had likely died around 11 p.m., more than 3 hours before I saw her on the road. I didn't blink. My skin crawled deeper with every word. The news showed her photo. It was her. The same woman I'd seen standing in the ditch, soaked, waving, looking terrified. The same woman who reappeared on the other side of the road. The same woman whose voice whispered inside my cab. I felt the chair beneath me shift slightly, like the room tilted. One of the older truckers noticed my expression and asked if I was okay. I nodded, but my jaw clenched so tight I couldn't speak. I finished half my coffee and left before the story ended. I didn't drive again until sunrise. On the way back along the same stretch of highway, daylight revealed muddy footprints at the edge of the ditch. Fresh ones. But no one had been reported missing overnight, and no rescue teams were present. When I slowed the truck to look, my radio, my fully powered-off radio, crackled again for just a moment. A single faint exhale came through the speaker. I never drove that route at night again. I avoided it for nearly 2 years. Eventually I learned from another driver that locals had reported seeing the same woman several times before. Always soaked. Always terrified. Always on foggy nights. They said she tried to get help long after she stopped needing it. Sometimes, people don't accept the moment they died. Sometimes they're still waiting for someone to stop. The end. The man walking behind my truck. It happened in February of 2021, at a remote truck stop outside Rock Springs, Wyoming, along Interstate 80. I was hauling a load of insulated wiring from Salt Lake City to Omaha, working a night run because the roads were clearer after dark that time of year. The entire stretch between Evanston and Rawlins was covered in hard-packed snow, and the temperature had dropped to -21°C. I'd been driving since late afternoon, and by the time I pulled into the lot it was nearly 3 a.m., the kind of hour when your mind is slow, your eyes burn, and every shadow looks alive. There were only 4 trucks in the entire lot, spaced far apart like stranded boats on frozen water. The wind kept sweeping fine snow across the asphalt, making little white rivers that curled around my boots as I stepped down from the cab. I planned to sleep for a few hours before continuing east. I did a quick walk around my trailer, making sure the doors were locked and my tires weren't losing pressure. Everything seemed normal. Quiet. Too quiet. When I climbed back into the cab, I decided to check the rear camera feed before shutting down. I didn't expect to see anything. The feed usually showed an empty stretch of pavement glowing faintly under the dull yellow truck stop lights. But someone was standing behind my trailer. At first I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The screen was grainy, a little washed out from the cold, and the lighting wasn't great. But after a second, the shape sharpened into a man, tall, thin, wearing a heavy coat and no hat. He wasn't moving. Just standing there. I leaned closer to the screen. The man's head was tilted slightly downward, like he was staring at the ground or maybe at his own shoes. I watched him for several long seconds, expecting him to walk away or approach another truck, but he didn't do anything. He just stayed exactly where he was. I felt a prickling crawl along my arms. There was no reason for anyone to be behind my trailer, and I hadn't heard any footsteps or movement. The snow was light but dry, it crunched loudly underfoot. I should have heard something. I checked my mirrors, expecting to see him there, but both sides showed only the empty, snow-dusted lot. I looked back at the camera. He was gone. My stomach dropped. I tapped the screen, thinking it froze. The feed jumped for a second, but the spot behind my trailer stayed empty. I turned the brightness down, then up, trying to be absolutely sure. Still nothing. I sat back in the driver's seat, telling myself exhaustion was messing with me. Long hauls do that. Shadows. Reflections. Imagination. I turned off the screen and tried to settle for sleep. But something felt wrong. The air inside my cab felt heavier. Denser. About 20 minutes later I heard a crunching sound outside. Slow, deliberate steps on the snow. I snapped upright. The steps moved around the back of the trailer, 1, 2, 3, then stopped directly behind my cab. I opened the camera feed again. The man was back. This time he wasn't standing still. He was pacing. Walking a few steps one way, turning sharply, walking back the other direction. Over and over, the exact same path. His hands hung stiffly at his sides, and his shoulders twitched slightly with each turn. His footsteps didn't quite match his pace on the camera, like the sound reached my ears a half-second after he moved. I unbuckled my seatbelt slowly, not knowing why I felt the need to be so quiet. I checked my mirrors again. The mirrors showed nothing. But the camera showed him clearly, moving, pacing, turning, pacing again. My throat tightened. Either my mirrors were failing, or the camera was lying, or something impossible was standing 10 feet behind me. I reached for my phone to call the truck stop security number posted on the lot sign, but when I looked back at the screen, the man had stopped pacing. He now stood facing directly toward the camera. His head lifted. I saw his face for the first time. It was wrong. Not mutilated, not monstrous, just wrong. His eyes were too dark for this lighting, like two deep pits pulling the shadows inward. His mouth hung slightly open, and his expression was empty, blank, like someone who had forgotten how to be alive. And then he took one slow step toward the back of my trailer. The camera flickered, then froze. When it came back online, he was only a few feet from the doors. Another flicker. He was closer. Another. He was at the doors. My pulse pounded in my ears. I turned the physical locks inside my cab, even though the doors were already secured. I kept staring at the screen because I was afraid to look away. The man pressed his hands against the trailer doors like he was trying to feel something inside. His fingers curled, scraping along the metal. The camera mic picked up the faint sound, like nails dragging lightly on a refrigerator door. Then he leaned his forehead against the trailer and went completely still. I didn't breathe. For several long minutes nothing moved. The wind stopped. The snow stopped. Even the building lights seemed to dim. I sat in total silence, listening for any hint of movement. Then the knocks started. 3 slow knocks. Then 2 quicker ones. It was a pattern. Repeated. Insistent. Hollow. Coming not from the camera feed but through the actual metal of the trailer itself. I could feel the vibration through the cab floor. 3 long knocks. 2 short. Repeat. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry as sand. The knocks continued for nearly a minute before stopping suddenly. I stared at the screen. The man was gone. The camera showed only the swirling snow. Before I decided what to do, the cab jolted slightly, as if someone had pressed their weight against the side of the truck. I spun to the passenger window but saw no one outside. Everything was empty again. That was enough. I turned the engine back on and drove straight toward the exit, not caring about rest, not caring about sleep, not caring about anything except getting far from that lot. I didn't stop until I reached Laramie. Later that morning, after the sun rose, I mentioned the incident on the CB radio, half expecting someone to laugh it off. Instead, a voice crackled through asking me what lot I'd been at. When I told him, he went quiet for a few seconds. Then he told me the story. A year earlier, a homeless man had frozen to death behind a parked truck in that same lot. He'd been pacing back and forth behind a trailer, hallucinating from exposure. No one noticed him. No one helped him. The driver whose truck he died next to didn't even know the man was there until morning. Since then, several drivers reported seeing someone walking behind their rigs late at night. Someone who never showed up in mirrors. Only in cameras. Someone pacing. Someone confused. Someone looking for the last trailer he leaned on before he died. I didn't respond on the radio. I didn't tell him the knocks matched the exact Morse code for the word cold. I never stopped at that truck stop again. I still drive I-80, but I plan my fuel and rest so I never have to set foot in Rock Springs after dark. Sometimes, when I pull into a quiet lot, I still check my rear camera twice before sleeping. Not for security, but to make sure nobody is pacing behind my truck. The end. The call from the CB radio. It happened in November of 2018, on a lonely stretch of Highway 2 in northern Montana, between the small towns of Wolf Point and Glasgow. I was hauling winter equipment to Havre, running a night schedule because the company needed an early morning delivery. The temperature was far below freezing, the sky moonless, and the only light across those endless plains came from my headlights cutting through drifting sheets of snow. I had been driving for nearly 6 hours without seeing a single other truck. It was close to 1:30 a.m. when the strange transmission came through. At first there was just static. That wasn't unusual, the wind was brutal, and long-distance interference happened often in storm conditions. But then the static dipped, rose, dipped again, like someone was adjusting a dial on the other end. I reached out and checked my own CB channel. Everything looked normal. I was about to turn it off when I heard a voice, soft, faint, distorted by distance. "Slow down." I froze. The voice was familiar. Too familiar. It sounded exactly like my old friend, Mason. We drove together years earlier on the same route. He died in 2016 in a rollover accident during a blizzard not far from this very stretch of Highway 2. My throat tightened. I stared at the CB speaker, waiting for the static to settle, waiting to hear anything else, even though I didn't want to. My hands started shaking on the wheel. Then the voice came again, clearer this time. "Slow down. The road ahead isn't clear." My whole body went cold. The CB wasn't picking up a random signal. It wasn't a trucker I didn't know. It wasn't interference. It was his voice. The same calm, low tone he used whenever he was trying not to panic. I felt my stomach twist painfully. I shouldn't have believed what I was hearing, but the warning felt real. And something in me listened. I eased off the accelerator. The trailer steadied behind me, and the wind buffeted the sides of the cab. My headlights found nothing on the road ahead, just snow drifting sideways in long white sheets. "Keep right," the voice whispered. I instinctively moved a little to the right side of my lane. Nothing happened. No turns, no hazards, no vehicles. I thought about shutting the radio off completely, but before I could reach for the dial, the voice returned, low, strained, almost urgent. "Don't pass the next rise." I swallowed hard. The next rise was a small hill barely noticeable in daylight but sharp enough at night to hide what lay behind it. I'd driven it dozens of times. It was always clear. But something inside me twisted again, a feeling I couldn't shake, a warning far deeper than fear. When I finally reached the rise, my headlights swept upward and then dipped over the hill. That's when I saw it. A jackknifed semi lay across both lanes of the highway, blacked out, no hazard lights, no flares, no movement inside the cab. Snow had piled against its side, and the trailer lay tilted, almost folding in on itself. If I had been going my original speed, 72 miles an hour, I would have hit it head-on with no time to brake. I slammed my brakes anyway, trying to stop before sliding into the wreck. The truck fishtailed wildly, tires skidding across ice, trailer pushing forward like a hammer. My seatbelt dug into my chest. I fought the wheel with both hands, steering into the skid, praying the trailer wouldn't swing completely out of control. It finally stopped 15 feet from the wreck. I sat there, breathing hard, my heart hammering louder than the engine. My ribs ached from the sudden stop. The inside of the cab was shaking from the engine strain and from my own trembling hands. Then the CB crackled softly. "Mason?" I whispered. Static. The radio was silent. For several long seconds I didn't move. The snow outside my windshield swirled under the headlights like smoke. I unbuckled slowly, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out into the freezing wind to check the wreck. The snow crunched under my boots, and each breath froze inside my scarf. The other truck was completely abandoned. The driver's side door was open, but no footprints led away from it. No tracks at all. Only snow that had been falling steadily for hours. The inside of the cab was empty, and the windshield was cracked from the impact. An old coffee thermos lay on the floor, half buried in frost. I radioed the highway patrol and told them what I'd found. They said they were already sending a unit. They'd received a partial distress signal from a semi in the area but lost the transmission before confirming its location. I waited inside my cab for almost 40 minutes until the patrol arrived. The officers searched the area, found no one, and said the wreck couldn't have been more than 30 minutes old based on the engine heat still trapped under the hood. They asked how I spotted it in the dark without reflectors or hazard lights. I didn't know how to answer. They eventually cleared me to leave, but I didn't turn the CB radio back on. Not for the rest of that drive. Not for several weeks afterward. But something happened the following afternoon that I can't explain. When I reached Havre and started unloading the trailer, I checked my CB transceiver because it was acting strange, static bursts, short beeps, faint echoes. When I bent closer to the speaker, expecting mechanical issues, I heard a short burst of wind come through, followed by the faintest whisper. "You're welcome." The hair on the back of my neck stood up so sharply it hurt. I stepped backward and almost dropped the receiver. The radio died completely a second later, shutting off with a soft click. When I tried to turn it back on, it wouldn't power up. The fuse had blown, and the wiring had melted slightly at one connection point. The repair tech who looked at it said he'd never seen a fuse blow that way. It looked like something overloaded the system from a source outside the truck. I didn't argue. I bought a new CB and installed it the same day, but every time I drive Highway 2 at night, I think about that voice. About that warning. About the fact that if I hadn't slowed down, if I had dismissed it as exhaustion or imagination, I would have died on that rise. Just like Mason had died on another winter road 2 years earlier. Sometimes, when I'm driving through heavy snow, I almost expect to hear him again. That calm, steady voice. That tone that always meant danger was ahead. But I haven't heard anything since. Just silence. Except once, months later, when I passed the exact spot of the wreck. My radio briefly flickered with static, only for half a second, and through it came something so faint I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Something that sounded like my name. Then nothing. Absolutely nothing. The end. The gas station with no employees. It happened in March of 2020, during a late-night haul through rural New Mexico along Highway 285, somewhere between Roswell and Vaughn. I was transporting cleaning chemicals to Las Cruces, running solo as usual. The desert air was cold, the sky completely black, and the road so empty that I didn't see another vehicle for almost an hour. It was close to 2:15 a.m. when my fuel gauge dipped low enough that I had to stop. I knew of one old gas station along that route, a place I'd used twice before, always staffed by a sleepy attendant, always quiet, always open. When I pulled off the highway and into the small gravel lot, I immediately sensed something was wrong. The station lights were on, every single one. The lamps above the pumps glowed a pale yellow, the windows of the convenience store were fully lit, and even the open sign buzzed faintly in the window. But the lot was empty. No cars. No employees outside. Not even a stray dog wandering near the dumpsters like usual. I parked beside the first pump, stepped out of the cab, and listened. Nothing. No radio music from inside. No humming from refrigerators. No voices. Not even insects. Just wind crawling lightly over the gravel. I scanned the lot carefully. Everything looked perfectly normal, clean, intact, almost staged. I walked toward the store doors, fully expecting to see the clerk behind the counter. As I got closer, I noticed the glass was spotless, too spotless for a place this remote. The handles were cold when I gripped them, but the doors opened easily with a soft chime from inside. I stepped in and called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice echoed back at me. The store was empty. Shelves were stocked neatly with chips, canned food, motor oil, windshield wipes. The refrigerators hummed quietly, their lights bright. The slush machine by the counter churned slowly. Even the coffee station looked freshly cleaned, with a new roll of cups stacked neatly beside it. But no one was there. No clerk. No movement. The small office behind the counter had its door cracked open, and even there, the light was on. I walked behind the counter and peeked inside. The chair was pushed in, the computer screen active, the mouse light blinking faintly. A half-finished energy drink sat on the desk, condensation still on the outside. Whoever had been here left very recently. I looked up at the store's security monitor on the wall, for camera feeds showing the lot, the aisles, and the back room. The camera aimed at the register showed something that made my stomach twist hard. I saw a man standing behind the counter. He wasn't actually there, not in front of me, but the grainy, black and white footage showed a tall man in a dark jacket, back slightly hunched, facing downward toward the register area. His silhouette was unmistakable. He wasn't moving. He wasn't looking up. He just stood there. I spun around, expecting to see him behind me. Nothing. The store was still empty. I looked at the monitor again. The figure was still there. "Hello?" I called out again, my voice cracking slightly. "Is someone here?" No answer. Suddenly, the man on the monitor lifted his head. Not all the way, just enough that I could see the shape of his jaw and the outline of his mouth. The screen flickered for half a second. When it stabilized, he wasn't behind the counter anymore. He was standing in the main aisle of the store. But when I turned to look at that aisle in real life, it was completely empty. No one stood there. No movement. Just shelves full of snacks reflecting the overhead lights. I looked back at the monitor. He was still on the screen, motionless, staring at nothing. My breathing turned shallow. My hands felt numb. The store felt colder. I backed away from the counter, keeping my eyes on the aisle as long as I could. I didn't want to turn my back to it, but I needed to leave. Every instinct screamed that something was wrong with this place, deeply wrong. Just as I reached the door, I heard something fall in the next aisle. Not loudly, just a soft clatter, like a small box tipping over. I froze. My heart slammed against my ribs. I forced myself to look. A small bottle of engine oil lay on its side on the floor. The shelf was otherwise perfectly aligned. I hadn't gone near that aisle. I slowly backed out the door, hands shaking, eyes darting to every dark corner of the store. As soon as the door closed behind me, the wind picked up, pushing cold air across my face. I stepped into the open lot, relieved to be out of the store. Then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. There were footprints in the dust behind the pumps. Bare footprints. Long, narrow, angled slightly inward, as if someone had been pacing back and forth behind the pumps for hours. They were fresh, edges sharp, undisturbed by wind. They led around the pump, then stopped abruptly near the far corner of the lot. I followed them with my eyes. They ended directly in front of the store's side window. A window I hadn't looked through yet. I slowly walked toward my truck, refusing to look at the side window. Every part of me was buzzing with panic. I climbed into the cab, locked the doors, and jammed the key into the ignition. The engine roared to life. I glanced at my mirrors. The store window reflected the pump lights clearly. And in that reflection, just for a second, I saw someone standing in the window. A tall figure. Not moving. Watching. I pressed the gas pedal and tore out of the lot, gravel spraying behind me. I didn't look back. Not once. I drove 10 miles before I slowed enough to breathe. The next morning, after daylight broke, I told another driver about what happened. He told me something I didn't believe at first. That gas station shut down in early 2019, he said quietly. Electrical fire in the back room. Clerk died inside. They boarded it up. No one's worked there since. I thought he was lying, so I checked online when I stopped for breakfast. The news articles were real. The fire was real. The death was real. The station had been closed for over a year. But I saw the lights on. The shelves stocked. The computer running. And the man on the monitor. A few weeks later, on another run through New Mexico, I passed the same location in broad daylight. The station was boarded up. Windows covered in plywood. Pumps removed. The building blackened along the back wall where the fire had been. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes during the day, I wouldn't have believed it. But nothing could explain what I walked into that night. Nothing. Sometimes, when I stop at remote gas stations now, I check the security cameras before stepping inside. Not for danger. For reflections. To make sure the only person in that store is the one I can see with my own eyes. The hitchhiker who disappeared. It happened in June of 2017, on a long, empty stretch of Route 50 in Nevada, the loneliest road in America, between Ely and Eureka. I was hauling a flatbed of construction steel from Reno to Salt Lake City, driving through the desert at night because the temperatures were cooler and the traffic almost non-existent. The sky was moonless, the road swallowed in darkness, and the only sound was the hum of my engine echoing into the empty desert. It was close to 12:40 a.m. when I first saw him. I had been driving through an unbroken tunnel of black for miles. Not a single pair of headlights behind me, no distant glow ahead, just me and my high beams piercing the emptiness. I rounded a gentle curve, and my headlights swept across something on the shoulder. A man. He stood on the right side of the road, facing the oncoming traffic, facing me, his arm raised half-heartedly, thumb out, but more trembling than pointing. He was young, maybe mid-20s, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans, and he looked terrified. Not sick, not injured, terrified. His eyes reflected the headlights like an animal's, wide and glistening. I slowed immediately, instinct kicking in before reason did. It was the middle of nowhere. No cars for miles. No towns nearby. A person stranded out here at night wouldn't last long. I pulled onto the shoulder about 15 yards ahead of him. When I opened my passenger door, he jogged up quickly but stiffly, as if every movement hurt. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded too fast. "Can I get in? Please. Just for a bit. I can't be out here." Something about the way he said that made my scalp tighten, but I unlocked the door and let him climb in. He slammed it shut and immediately locked it again, as if someone were chasing him. His breathing was ragged, panicked. "Long night?" I asked carefully. He didn't look at me. He stared straight ahead, swallowing hard. "You don't understand," he said. I can't be out there in the dark." His voice was shaking. His hands were shaking. His entire body was trembling like he'd been freezing, though the night air was warm. I eased the truck back onto the road. After a minute, when he finally seemed to settle, he whispered, "Thank you." "Really?" "No problem," I said. "Where you headed?" He hesitated. "Just east." "Anywhere east." "Okay. You got a name?" His reply was barely audible. "Evan." We drove for several minutes in heavy silence. I didn't want to push him, whatever he'd been through, he obviously didn't want to talk. But something kept pulling at my attention. He never looked around. Never looked at me. Not once. He just kept staring at the windshield with those wide, frightened eyes, as if expecting something to appear in front of us at any moment. Eventually, he spoke again. "You didn't see him, did you?" My grip on the wheel tightened. "See who?" He finally turned his head, slowly, to look at me. His face was pale, drained of color, his eyes huge. "The man walking behind your truck," he whispered. A chill shot through me so sharply it felt physical. I hadn't seen anyone behind my truck. I hadn't even thought to check. But before I could respond, he pointed out the passenger window, toward the desert outside. "He follows the headlights," Evan murmured. "He stays just out of sight. If you stop, he gets closer." I swallowed hard. What are you talking about? Was someone out there with you? He nodded once, violently. He chased me first. I thought he was a coyote until he stood up. He shouldn't move like that. He shouldn't exist. I felt ice crawl along my spine. I tried to press him for details, but he suddenly stiffened, his fingers digging into the seat. He's here. I glanced at the mirrors. Nothing. I checked the side window. Nothing. The road behind us was a black void stretching endlessly into the desert. What do you mean he's here? I asked. Evan didn't answer directly. He placed a shaking hand against the dashboard, as if bracing himself. You can see him when he wants you to, he whispered. Only then. I turned the music down, listening for anything unusual, but the cab was dead quiet. Then he asked something that made the hair on my arms lift. You hear it? Hear what? I said. The footsteps, he whispered. I listened harder. The wind. The rumble of the tires. Nothing else. But Evan pressed his hands over his ears, squeezing them shut. He's running alongside us, he said. I can hear him hitting the gravel. He never gets tired. My pulse hammered in my throat. I rolled down my window just slightly, trying to catch any sound over the engine, but there was nothing but wind whipping past. You sure you're? Look, he shouted suddenly. I slammed on the brakes. 50 yards ahead, lying sideways across the centerline, was a massive piece of metal debris, some kind of trailer ramp or heavy equipment component. If I hadn't stopped, my wheels would have hit it at 65 miles per hour. It would have torn through the tires, maybe flipped the truck. I stared at the obstacle, my heart pounding. But what made it worse, much worse, was that something had placed it there recently. The dust around it was disturbed. The scrape marks were fresh. Evan leaned close to the windshield, eyes shaking. He does that. He tries to stop you. He tries to make you get out. My palms were sweating, my breathing shallow. I backed up slowly, maneuvered around the debris, and pushed back onto the highway. I didn't speak. Neither did he. For a while, the only sound was the soft hum of the engine and the endless road scrolling under us. 20 minutes later, after we passed the border of a small ghost town called Hamilton, nothing left but foundations and rusting metal, Evan finally exhaled shakily. I think he stopped, he whispered. I think the light here is enough. I didn't understand what he meant, but for the first time since he climbed in, his shoulders relaxed just a little. His breathing steadied. His trembling slowed. Then, without warning, without a sound, without a movement, he was gone. There was no fade, no flicker, no blur. One moment he was in the passenger seat, hands resting tensely in his lap, staring out the window. And the next moment the seat was empty. The residue of his presence, warmth on the seat cushion, faint fog from his breath on the window, vanished as if erased. The truck suddenly felt colder, the air thinner. I slammed the brakes and pulled over onto the shoulder, heart racing. I climbed out of the cab, yelling his name into the desert. Nothing. The night swallowed my voice. I walked around the truck with my flashlight, no tracks. No footprints. The gravel was untouched except for my tire marks. I climbed back into the cab shaking uncontrollably. The seat belt he'd worn hung open like it had never been touched. When I finally reached Ely the next morning, exhausted and pale, I asked the sheriff's deputy if any hitchhikers had been reported missing. He asked where I'd picked the man up, and when I told him the mile marker, the deputy's expression changed. He asked me to describe him. I did. He nodded slowly and said, "You're not the first driver to see him." He explained that a young man matching that exact description died on that stretch of highway in 1999, struck by a long-haul carrier just after midnight. Every few years, drivers reported picking him up, always alone, always terrified, always running from something in the darkness behind him. No one ever sees him after daylight. And no one has ever seen the man following him, except through footsteps or movement in the dark. I didn't take on any night runs through Nevada again for a long time. When I finally drove that route months later, I passed the spot where I'd seen him. For a moment, reflected weakly in my side mirror, I thought I saw someone standing on the shoulder. Arms raised. As if trying to flag me down again. But when I looked directly, no one was there. Only the empty desert. Only the silence. Only the darkness waiting behind me. The end. The highway that looped back. It happened in August of 2022, during a long-haul delivery through the deep forests of northern Idaho, along Highway 95 between Grangeville and Riggins. I was hauling a refrigerated load of produce to Boise, running the night shift because daytime summer traffic in the mountains could slow a delivery by hours. I'd driven this route dozens of times, and even though the curves were sharp and the cliffs unforgiving, I knew nearly every mile. But that night, just past 1:10 a.m., the road did something it had never done before. The air was heavy with smoke from distant wildfires, making the darkness thicker, more suffocating. My headlights reflected in the haze, creating long white tunnels that vanished as quickly as they formed. The forest rose heavily on both sides of the highway, dense and silent, not a single car or truck behind me for miles. The radio was off. My phone had no signal. It was just me, the road, and the endless night. I had just passed mile marker 204 when I noticed something odd. A dead deer lay on the right shoulder. It was fresh, barely stiff, the fur ruffled by the wind of passing cars. I swerved slightly left to avoid rolling over it. I'd seen dead animals plenty of times on rural highways. I didn't think much of it. 10 minutes later, I passed mile marker 204 again. At first I thought I misread it. Maybe it was 206 or 208, the haze distorted signs sometimes. But a minute later, my headlights swept across the same deer lying on the shoulder. Same position. Same angle. Same awkward twist of its neck. I slowed down, confused. Either someone had moved the deer in that exact position, or I had driven past the same point twice. I checked my GPS. The screen showed my icon moving forward normally, progressing south. But the landscape around me hadn't changed. The same tall pine leaning sharply over the road appeared again, the same fallen log half hidden in the ditch, even the same swirling pattern of smoke drifting across the asphalt. I felt a cold pressure tighten across my chest. The road felt wrong, too familiar now, too precise. I focused harder, gripping the wheel. The forest seemed to shift slightly, like something beneath the haze was rearranging itself. Another 20 minutes passed. Then I saw it again. Mile marker 204. The exact same deer. The third time. I braked hard and pulled onto the shoulder, heart pounding. Gravel crackled beneath my tires. I shut off the engine and stepped out with my flashlight. The air was thick with smoke, burning the back of my throat. The trees around me were silent, too silent. No crickets. No wind. Not even the distant hum of the river. I walked to the deer. Its body was warm. Recently killed. Fresh. But not fresh twice. Not 3 times. I backed away quickly, scanning the forest. Sweat rolled down my neck despite the cool night air. I turned in a slow circle, trying to hear anything other than my own breath. Nothing. Just emptiness. When I climbed back into the cab and restarted the truck, my GPS glitched. The map flickered, showing 2 different roads layered over each other. Then the screen went completely black. I tapped it, no response. I restarted the system. It didn't load. The forest pressed against the windows like a silent crowd. I pulled back onto the road, unsure what else to do, and began driving again, slowly this time. I kept checking the odometer. It matched the distance I was traveling perfectly. I wasn't circling. I wasn't turning. I was driving straight. But the forest had other plans. Another 15 minutes passed before I saw the same leaning pine tree again. The shape was unmistakable. The bark peeled on one side. The angled trunk slanted toward the road like it wanted to fall across it. And then, mile marker 204. Same deer. Fourth time. My breathing grew shallow. I gripped the wheel with both hands, trying to stay calm. The road was looping. Not turning, not twisting, looping. Feeding itself into itself like a snake eating its own tail. I turned on my hazard lights and slowed to a crawl. That's when the forest changed. Not visually. Not obviously. But something in the air shifted. The smoke seemed quieter. The darkness took on a new texture, heavier, almost sticky. I felt watched, deeply, intensely, from every shadow beyond the trees. Then my headlights caught something. Movement. Not an animal. Not a person. A distorted shape. A silhouette of a truck. A semi-truck. It was far ahead at first, moving slowly in the opposite direction. Its headlights were off, its outline faint in the smoke. But it grew clearer as I approached. Then my heart stopped. The truck wasn't just another vehicle. It was mine. Same cab. Same trailer length. Same minor dent on the left side of the reefer unit. Same reflective tape pattern. I was staring at my own truck coming toward me. I swerved onto the shoulder so violently the trailer nearly swung out of line. The other truck, my truck, passed me by inches. Its engine made no sound. Its lights remained dead. The metal gleamed like wet steel in the haze. I stared into its cab as it passed. No driver. The steering wheel turned itself lightly as it followed the curve. I couldn't breathe. When the phantom truck disappeared behind me into the smoke, the road fell deadly silent again. The forest seemed to draw closer. The headlights felt weaker, flickering slightly. I slammed my foot on the gas and took the first turnoff I saw, a narrow maintenance road that wasn't meant for trucks. My tires kicked dirt and dust everywhere, the trailer barely staying aligned. Branches scraped along the sides of the cab with a screeching metallic scrape. But I had to get off Highway 95. I had to break the loop. I drove at an angle, cutting south through back roads and forest access paths, ignoring the GPS, ignoring maps, ignoring everything but the desperate instinct to escape. 30 minutes later, the trees parted and I hit a paved road I recognized, Highway 55. I had somehow ended up nearly 30 miles west of where I should have been. My GPS blinked back to life. When I checked the route, I realized the maintenance road I'd taken didn't exist, not on the maps, not on satellite view, not anywhere. It vanished completely when I tried to track it. The next day, I told a few older truckers in Boise about what happened. One of them looked at me for a long time, then asked quietly, "Did the loop trap you more than twice?" "4 times," I said. He nodded slowly. "You were lucky, then." Another asked, "Did you see yourself?" I didn't answer. They exchanged glances and fell silent. One of them finally said, "That stretch has taken good men. Some say the smoke out there, it plays tricks. Shows you things. Keeps you spinning until you stop." I didn't take that route for almost a year. When I finally had no choice but to drive Highway 95 again, I did it in daylight. Bright sun, clear air, heavy traffic. And still, at mile marker 204, my engine briefly sputtered. My headlights flickered. And for 1 second, just one, I thought I saw a deer on the shoulder. But when I blinked, it was gone. Now I avoid that stretch whenever I can. And when I can't, I refuse to drive it at night. I don't look at the trees. I don't look at the shoulders. I don't look for landmarks. I don't want to see any of it again. And I never, ever check my mirrors at mile marker 204. Not anymore. The end. The knocks under the trailer. It happened in January of 2020, on a frozen stretch of Highway 212 in southeastern Montana, not far from the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. I was hauling livestock feed from Rapid City to Billings, taking the night route to avoid daytime winds on the plains. Snow had fallen steadily for hours, leaving the road coated in a thin, icy crust that cracked faintly under my tires. It was close to 2:50 a.m. when the first strange sound reached me. The place was empty, truly empty. No towns, no lights, only endless white fields and a moon buried behind thick clouds. The cold was so strong it felt like the air itself was brittle, ready to shatter. I'd stopped at a small pull-off about 15 miles west of Broadus to check my brakes, as the mountain temperature had dropped to nearly -26°C. The truck idled softly, exhaust drifting upward in thin white ribbons. I walked the perimeter of the trailer with my flashlight, boots crunching on the crusted snow. Everything looked normal. No leaks. No loose ties. No damage. When I climbed back into the cab, I let the heater run a moment longer before pulling out. That's when I heard it. A single, heavy thump under the trailer. Not from inside, under. I froze, gripping the wheel, listening. Wind. Engine. Silence. I leaned forward slightly, trying to judge whether it had come from the road or from the rig itself. Then another thump came, this one sharper, closer to the driver's side rear tires. I rolled down my window. The cold sliced into the cab instantly, numbing the skin on my cheek, but I kept listening. Nothing. I shut the window and started driving again, chalking it up to ice breaking apart in the wheel wells. I'd heard similar sounds 1,000 times in winter. But 2 minutes later, the knocks returned. 3 long, slow knocks. Space between each. Like someone striking metal deliberately. Then 2 shorter knocks. Not random. Not like ice falling. A pattern. 3 long. 2 short. Repeat. My hands tightened on the wheel until my knuckles went white. I turned down the engine fan, listening to the metal beneath the trailer vibrate faintly with the rhythm. 3 long. 2 short. I had heard that cadence before, years ago, Morse code. I didn't know the full language, but I knew enough to recognize deliberate structure. I slowed to a crawl and rolled onto the shoulder. The knocks continued, rhythmic, patient, as if whatever was beneath the trailer knew I'd stopped. I switched on my hazards, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out into the night. The cold slammed into me like a wall. My breath crystallized instantly, hanging in the beam of the light. The wind carried nothing but a low, steady moan across the plains. I crouched and shined the flashlight under the trailer. Nothing. Only metal, snow, and the long beam of light stretching out the other side. No movement. No footprints leading toward or away from the rig. No animals. Nothing that could have caused the sound. I walked around the truck slowly, checking every inch of the trailer's underside. It was the kind of bitter cold that makes your eyelashes freeze together, the kind where you hear your own breath crackle. The world felt empty, too empty. Even the snow didn't fall anymore. The knocks stopped when I stepped away from the cab. I waited. Silence. I climbed back into the truck, heart thudding in my chest, and shut the door. The heater slowly warmed the cab, thawing the pain in my fingers. I stared into the darkness ahead, trying to convince myself it was only winter settling the metal. But when I put the truck back into gear and rolled forward, the knocks began again. 3 long. 2 short. Louder this time. Closer to the 5th axle. I pressed harder on the wheel, my breath shallow. The pattern repeated, each set a little more forceful, like something was trying to get my attention. I drove for several more minutes, hoping the sound would fade. Instead, it grew clearer. Then I heard something else. A scrape. Not metal on metal. Not ice. Fingers. Dragging across the inside panel of the trailer's underside. My throat tightened painfully. I eased off the accelerator and let the truck slow without braking. I didn't want to stop. Stopping felt dangerous, like opening a door you weren't meant to open. But the scraping followed, deliberate and slow, matching the speed of the truck. I finally pulled over again, but this time I didn't step outside. I grabbed my flashlight, rolled down the window, and leaned out as far as I could, shining the light beneath the trailer from above. Still nothing. But the knocks began again, so violent now that the truck shook slightly. I could feel them through the floor beneath my boots. For a full 30 seconds, the knocks hammered the steel. Then they stopped abruptly. Silence flooded the night. I waited, pulse pounding in my ears, but nothing happened. No scraping. No knocks. Just the hollow howl of wind across the open plains. I forced myself back onto the highway, refusing to look in the mirrors for several minutes. When the knocks didn't return after nearly 10 miles, I let out a shaky breath. The world around me remained dead quiet, the moon still hidden behind thick clouds. 20 minutes later, I approached a small gas station at Ashland. Lights spilled across the parking lot like a warm island in the frozen dark. I pulled in and parked beside one of the pumps. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. And then I saw them. Inside the thin layer of frost coating the underside of my trailer, clear as day, were handprints. Dozens of them. Small, large, smeared, some recent, some older. Hands pressed up from beneath the steel, as if something, or multiple somethings, had touched the metal while it was frozen. Some streaks dragged downward, like fingers slipping or clawing. My stomach dropped. I knelt beside the trailer, brushing frost away with my glove. The handprints were unmistakably human. When I entered the gas station, the clerk saw my face and asked if everything was all right. I told him what happened. He didn't laugh. He didn't look surprised. Instead, he sighed and said quietly, "Drivers hear things out there. That stretch between Broadus and the Ridge, it's where we lost 2 search parties last winter. They think both were caught in a snowburst and froze before they found their way out." I stared at him. "They never found the bodies," he added. My stomach churned. The knocks. The Morse-like rhythm. The scraping. The handprints under the trailer. The clerk whispered, "When people freeze, sometimes they crawl. They find metal. They hit it. Try to signal. Nobody hears them." I didn't sleep that night. I drove straight through to Billings, shaking every time I hit a rough patch of road. The next morning, in the daylight, I inspected the underside again. The handprints were gone. Completely. Not melted, gone. As if the frost had formed perfectly smooth overnight. Since that night, I don't pull over on Highway 212 anymore, not even for a blown belt or a loose strap. I limp to the nearest town no matter what. Because I can still hear it sometimes, faintly, in the back of my mind. 3 long. 2 short. A message from people who never made it out of the snow. A signal from beneath the frozen dark. The end. The black truck with no driver. It happened in October of 2021 on a remote stretch of Highway 191 in eastern Utah, between Moab and Monticello. I was hauling a dry van of packaged goods from Denver to Phoenix, running through the desert at night to avoid the brutal daytime heat. The moon was thin, barely visible behind drifting clouds, and the red cliffs on both sides of the road formed long black walls that swallowed the headlights the moment they passed. I had just crossed the turnoff toward Canyonlands when the first sign of something wrong appeared. It was close to 1:55 a.m. The air was cold, the surrounding desert still. My CB radio was off. My phone had no service. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic hum of the engine and the occasional rattle of the trailer over the uneven asphalt. I checked the mirrors out of habit, and froze. A truck was behind me. A semi. Pitch black cab, pitch black trailer, no lights, no reflectors, no decals. Completely dark, moving fast, barely 50 yards behind me. It hadn't been there 30 seconds earlier. I would have seen its headlights at the very least, but the truck crept out of the darkness like it had been hiding there, as if the road had swallowed it and spat it out right behind me. I kept driving, heart pounding, eyes fixed on the mirrors. The black truck stayed close behind me, not dangerously close, but uncomfortably, unnaturally close. If he had no headlights, he shouldn't have been able to judge the distance. It was too precise, too controlled. I tapped my brakes lightly. The black truck slowed perfectly in response. No delay. No mistake. No human misjudgment. A cold shiver moved through me. I turned on my hazard lights and changed lanes to the left, giving the driver a chance to pass. The black truck stayed directly behind me, not shifting an inch. I pressed harder on the brakes. He matched me perfectly again. That was when I realized something I hadn't wanted to consider. If he had no headlights, he couldn't see me. Not naturally. Not without something else guiding him. I flicked off my hazards, swallowed hard, and pressed the gas. The desert blurred by. My speed climbed. 65. 70. 75. He stayed with me. Always the same distance. Always perfectly centered in my mirror. The road began to curve, bending to the right around a low ridge. I slowed slightly, keeping myself steady through the turn. The black truck didn't turn. It slid. Not skidded, slid. The entire rig kept pointing forward even as the road curved, moving sideways with the shape of the asphalt like it was floating above it. My breath caught in my throat. I slammed the gas pedal. 75. 80. 85. My engine roared, the desert rushing past in a blur of darkness. My trailer shook dangerously. But the black truck stayed behind me, gliding effortlessly across the road with unnatural grace, always at the exact same distance. When I checked the mirror again, something new made my blood run ice cold. There was no driver. The cab windows were completely clear. I could see straight through them when the moonlight broke between clouds. No silhouette, no movement, no one at the wheel. It was empty. I stared into the mirror, unable to look away. The cab was fully transparent from my angle. The seat was empty. The cabin was dark. No hands, no shape, nothing. Still it followed. Steady. Smooth. Intelligent. I tried shaking the trailer by swerving slightly. He swerved in perfect synchronization, mimicking every movement as if connected by an invisible chain. Then the black truck's headlights flashed on. Not gradually. Not naturally. Instantly. Two beams of blinding white light burst from the truck behind me, so bright they illuminated the inside of my cab. I shielded my eyes and tried to keep control of the wheel. The lights flickered once. Twice. Then stayed on, burning into my mirrors. I reached for my CB radio, desperate for another human voice, but before I could even touch it, the cabin filled with a high-pitched harmonic vibration, something electrical, unnatural, humming through the glass, the floor, the steering column. My radio began crackling violently with static, then went completely dead. Just like that. The black truck's horn blared. Long, low. Mechanical. The sound vibrated inside my chest, deeper than any truck horn I'd ever heard. It rattled the windows, made my teeth ache. I floored the gas again, pushing the engine past safe limits. That's when the road narrowed. The desert cliffs rose higher on both sides, forming a dark canyon that trapped sound inside. My truck thundered through the tight pass. The black truck's lights filled every mirror, every inch of my vision. The canyon amplified the horn until it felt like the entire world was screaming. I rounded another bend, and suddenly, up ahead, I saw something faint in the darkness. A construction barrier. A warning sign. Roadwork on the right lane. I swerved left. The black truck swerved with me. Then I saw something that made my blood stop. The black truck wasn't swerving. It was gliding through the barrier. The plastic barrels, the cones, the sign, they passed through the truck like smoke. I slammed my brakes. My tires screeched. The trailer fishtailed. But I managed to stop just before hitting the barrier for real. My cab shook violently. Dust swirled around me. For a long moment, I just sat there, gripping the wheel, breath shallow, heart racing. Then, slowly, terrified, I checked the mirror. Empty road. No black truck. No lights. No sound. Only the desert silence pressing in. I waited there for nearly a full minute, too afraid to move, staring down the highway that only moments ago held something impossible. Finally, with trembling hands, I pulled forward slowly, weaving carefully through the construction zone. My radio powered back on without me touching anything. My GPS restarted. The electrical hum vanished. I reached Monticello around 4 a.m. and parked at the first truck stop I saw. Inside, I was pale, shaking uncontrollably when I told the attendant what happened. He didn't laugh. He didn't look confused. He only asked one thing. Was it the black one? I stared at him, unable to speak. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd heard before. Drivers see it out here. No plates. No lights. No driver. Follows you until the road changes. What is it? I whispered. He shook his head. Don't know. But every story is the same, never passes you. Never falls behind. Just follows. I drove that route twice more in the following years, both times in broad daylight. Nothing strange happened. No dark truck appeared. No lights. No horn. But something stayed with me, an image burned into my mind forever. Those empty windows. That hollow cab. That silent, perfect mimicry. And the way it moved, like a machine that had forgotten how to be controlled by a human. Now, whenever I drive through a desert at night, I keep my mirrors angled slightly lower, avoiding direct reflections. Because I know what I might see. A black truck. Driverless. Silent. Waiting. The end. The voice from the empty passenger seat. It happened in April of 2020, on Highway 60 in Arizona, between the small desert towns of Globe and Show Low. I was hauling a mixed load of restaurant supplies on an overnight run from Phoenix to Holbrook. It was close to 2:30 a.m., the hour when the desert feels the most abandoned, the most hollow, the most dangerous. The sky was moonless, the temperature unusually cold, and the wind slid across the highway like a whisper. I hadn't seen another vehicle in almost 40 minutes, not even a distant set of headlights. The desert stretched out like a black ocean around me. I was halfway up a long grade, climbing towards Salt River Canyon, when it started. At first it was nothing, just the usual hum of the engine and the rattle of the trailer. I rolled down the window an inch for fresh air and leaned slightly toward the center console. The cab was warm, the heater steady, everything familiar. Then I heard it. A voice. Clear. Soft. Inches from my right ear. Keep right. I jerked the wheel slightly, heart pounding. I whipped my head toward the passenger seat. Empty. I stared at the seat for a long moment, expecting to see someone crouched low or leaning forward. But there was nothing. Only my jacket draped neatly across the seat back, unmoved. I ran my tongue over my teeth, trying to steady my breathing. Maybe I'd imagined it. Long hours at the wheel can make you hear things. I kept driving. A few seconds passed. Then the voice came again. Keep right. This time I felt the words more than heard them, a faint breath against my cheek, as if a person were leaning forward, speaking quietly, carefully. My chest tightened painfully. I checked the mirrors, the side window, the sleeper behind me. Nothing. No shadows, no shapes, no movement. Just the low hum of the road. I swallowed hard. Who's there? No answer. The desert wind whistled faintly along the edges of the cab. I took a deep breath and forced myself to focus. Maybe the radio had flickered on. Maybe audio interference had come through a channel. I reached for the CB. It was off. Completely off. I turned it on. Static filled the cab for a second before the usual silence returned. I turned it off again. The cab went quiet. That was when the voice whispered again, closer now, like someone leaning beside me. Right. Keep right. I shifted a little in my seat, skin crawling. I kept the truck steady in the right lane but checked the mirrors obsessively. 2 minutes passed. Then the voice changed. Slow down. I hit the brakes instantly, every nerve firing at once. I didn't know why I listened, I just did. Something about the tone wasn't threatening. It was urgent. Protective. The truck slowed to 50, then 45. I scanned the road ahead frantically. That's when the deer appeared. A massive mule deer burst from the darkness on the left side of the road, leaping directly across my lane. If I had been going full speed, I would have hit it head-on. Even with my reduced speed, it passed barely 10 feet in front of my bumper. I watched its shadow vanish into the black desert beyond my headlights. My hands shook violently. I exhaled in a broken gasp. The cab was silent for a long moment. Then the voice whispered again, softer this time. Good. Now breathe. I did. Slowly. Deeply. But fear didn't leave my chest. If anything, it grew heavier. I forced myself to check the passenger seat again, turning my whole body toward it. Nobody. The empty seat stared back at me, pale in the glow of the dashboard lights. I gripped the wheel harder. My breath fogged the air in front of me. It felt colder now, like someone had opened a window I couldn't see. Who are you? I whispered. Silence. The desert moved past in long black waves. The highway rose, curved, dipped. My headlights stretched into the darkness ahead. For several minutes, no sound came except the engine. Then the voice returned. Stay awake. I flinched, heart hammering. I am awake. But the voice didn't respond. Instead it spoke again, calmer, almost sad. You fell asleep once. Don't let it happen again. My hands trembled uncontrollably. I wanted to deny it, but the truth hit me hard. A year earlier, on this same route, I had nodded off for a split second on a late-night drive. I drifted partially off the asphalt before jerking the wheel back. Nobody else knew that, not even my wife. I never told anyone. It lasted seconds. I kept it secret. How do you know that? I whispered. Silence. The cab felt colder. My breath came out in small white clouds. I rubbed my arms, shivered, and tried to steady myself. The voice whispered again, this time directly beside my ear. I'm here. I nearly swerved off the road. The voice sounded familiar now. Not fully. Just enough that it scraped at a distant memory. But I didn't have time to think because the road ahead suddenly dipped into a steep curve, the beginning of Salt River Canyon. The descent was dangerous even in daylight. At night, with no guardrails in certain areas, it was deadly. The voice returned, louder than before. Brake. I slammed my foot down. The engine brake roared. The trailer groaned behind me. The truck slowed hard, tires gripping the asphalt. That's when I saw it. A rock slide. A massive boulder lay broken across the right lane, surrounded by smaller shards of stone. Dust still floated in the air, meaning the slide had happened recently, maybe minutes before I arrived. If I hadn't braked when I did, I would have hit it at 60 miles an hour. My breath caught. My eyes burned. Thank you, I whispered, voice cracking. The cab grew eerily quiet. The cold air lifted slightly. The road straightened a bit as I descended further. Then the voice came one final time. You're welcome. A soft exhale followed, warm, gentle, almost familiar. It brushed across my cheek, disappearing into the cold air of the cab. Then the temperature rose. The air returned to normal. The presence left. I didn't hear anything else for the rest of the drive. When I finally reached the truck stop in Show Low, I parked in the brightest spot I could find and sat there trembling. I didn't sleep, but I watched the sun rise over the pines, trying to convince myself I hadn't gone insane. Later that morning, as I paid for coffee inside the station, an older driver overheard me asking about rock slides on Highway 60. He looked up slowly. They happen a lot, he said. My brother died on that road 5 years ago. Fell asleep. Hit a boulder. No one saw him until morning. My stomach twisted. Your brother? He nodded. Ethan. Always told me I drove too fast. Always told me to keep right through the canyon. The name hit me hard. I had hauled with a man named Ethan once, briefly, in 2019. 3 weeks later he left the company. I never saw him again. His voice had changed in death, but the cadence, the careful tone, the soft way he spoke in emergencies. It had been him. I didn't say any of that to his brother. I just stood there, silent, hands cold around the coffee cup. That night, when I started my return trip, I double-checked the passenger seat before pulling out. Nothing there. No sound. No breath. No presence. But as I passed through the canyon again, this time in daylight, I found myself whispering anyway. I'm keeping right. Just in case he was still listening. The end. He wasn't alone on the highway. It happened in December of 2018, on a silent stretch of Highway 89 in northern Wyoming, between Alpine and Jackson Hole. I was hauling a refrigerated load of dairy products from Idaho Falls to Bozeman, running alone through the mountains because a snowstorm had been forecast for the morning. It was close to 3:20 a.m., the sky was pitch black, and the temperature hovered below -20. The highway was empty, no lights, no cars, no plows. The only sound in the world was the steady hum of my engine and the faint whistle of wind sliding between the peaks. I'd driven that route countless times, but that night the silence felt wrong, too deep, too heavy, like the darkness had weight. The snow along the shoulders reflected my headlights just enough to create faint, pale walls on both sides. The road curved gently ahead of me, cutting between dense pines that leaned in like silent watchers. I was alone. At least, I thought I was. I had just passed mile marker 68 when a subtle movement caught my eye. At first I thought it was a trick of the light, my headlights bending around a bend. But then I saw it more clearly. A shape running along the right shoulder. Running fast. Faster than a person should be able to run. I blinked hard, leaned closer toward the windshield. The figure kept pace with the truck, matching my speed exactly. At 55 miles an hour, that shouldn't have been possible. The shape was dark, nearly blending into the trees, but the movement was unmistakable. Long strides. Lean limbs. A head that didn't bob the way a normal runner's would. It moved too smoothly, too evenly, gliding at an impossible pace. I whispered under my breath, "What the hell?" I pressed harder on the gas. 58. 62. 68. The figure matched me. Still running. Still keeping up. I gripped the wheel tighter, my throat tightening. The darkness was thick, swallowing everything except the small slice of road my headlights illuminated. The runner stayed just outside that cone of light, as if intentionally avoiding it. I couldn't see details, only the silhouette of a man-sized form sprinting alongside the truck without breaking stride. I rolled down the window an inch, listening. No footsteps. No breath. Only the hum of the engine. A chill deeper than the winter air crawled up my spine. I wasn't alone. The road curved to the left. I slowed slightly so I wouldn't risk the trailer fishtailing. The runner slowed with me. Perfectly. I snapped my eyes to the passenger mirror, but the angle didn't catch him. The forest beyond the shoulder was a wall of darkness. I checked the driver's mirror, nothing. When I looked forward again, the shape had vanished. I exhaled shakily, letting my grip loosen. Then something struck the side of my trailer. A heavy, solid thump. I jerked the wheel, heart hammering. The truck stayed steady, but the noise echoed through the cab like someone had slammed their full weight into the steel. I checked the mirrors again, nothing there. Another thump, closer this time. Then another. 3 in a row, moving forward toward the cab. Something was hitting the trailer as it ran alongside me. My mouth went dry. My breathing turned shallow. I pressed the accelerator again. 72. 75. The knocks grew louder. Then they stopped. The hair on the back of my neck lifted. The desert of headlights ahead was empty, quiet, endless. And then I saw it again. Not on the shoulder this time. In the ditch. The figure was running in the low dip beside the road, this time closer to the light. I caught a clearer glimpse, a long, thin frame, limbs moving with unnatural precision, arms still at its sides, not swinging like a human's would. It wasn't breathing heavily. It wasn't struggling. It was effortless. Gliding. Watching. I sped up again, panic rising in my throat. 81. 84. The trailer rattled, the engine strained. But the figure accelerated smoothly. Keeping pace. Then, suddenly, it cut across the ditch toward the road. Straight for me. I slammed the brakes so hard the truck lurched forward, the trailer pushing slightly before stabilizing. My seatbelt dug into my chest. The world outside shook in my headlights. The figure stopped just at the edge of the pavement, 1 inch from stepping into the light. Frozen. Perfectly still. I stared at it, hands trembling violently. It remained motionless, as if waiting for something. Its shape was wrong, too tall, too thin, head tilted slightly to the side, like it was studying the truck. Studying me. I whispered, "Don't come closer." The wind carried my voice into the darkness. The figure took 1 step toward the road. I floored the gas. The truck roared forward, tires gripping the icy asphalt. The shape vanished back into the darkness as if yanked away by invisible strings. My heart pounded so hard I thought I might pass out, but adrenaline kept me focused. I didn't look back. I didn't breathe properly for miles. The trees thinned out as the highway descended toward Jackson Hole. The first faint orange glow of distant town lights appeared on the horizon. Only then, only when the world felt normal again, did I check the mirrors. Nothing behind me. Nothing on the shoulders. No movement in the ditch. I drove straight into Jackson, parked at a well-lit station, and stepped out on shaking legs. I walked around the truck just to reassure myself that the world was real again. That's when I noticed the marks. Along the passenger side of the trailer, stretching nearly 20 feet, were long streaks in the frost. Finger streaks. 5 thin lines dragging horizontally across the freezing steel. Not scratches. Not dents. Impressions. Each streak was perfectly spaced, thumb, index, middle, ring, pinky, like a cold hand had kept pace with the truck, pressing against the metal as it ran. But they were too long. Each finger was longer than a normal person's. I brushed the frost with my glove, but the marks remained, clearer now that I stood close. They looked freshly made. They looked deliberate. Someone, or something, had touched the side of my trailer while running at highway speed. I swallowed hard and stepped back, heart pounding violently. A few hours later, just after sunrise, I reached my drop-off location in Bozeman. While checking in, I mentioned to another driver what I'd heard and seen. I expected him to laugh or call me crazy. He didn't. He grew pale, eyes narrowing, jaw tightening. Then he said quietly, "You saw the highway runner." I froze. What? He nodded slowly. A few drivers see him every winter. Always alone on the road. Always between Alpine and Jackson. Runs fast. Too fast. Never steps into the headlights. My throat tightened. What is it? He shook his head. Some say it's a man who froze out there in the 80s. Some say it's not a man at all. I wanted to ask more, but he walked away without another word, as if speaking about it any further might invite something. I still drive that stretch sometimes. Not by choice. And never at night. But 2 months after the incident, I made the mistake of checking my mirrors during a dark run near the Wyoming border. For just a split second, I saw movement, a flicker of something keeping pace with the truck. Running. Watching. Waiting for the lights to dim. I didn't look again. I kept my eyes forward and whispered to myself the whole way through that valley, You're not alone. Not here. The end.